So great. Welcome everybody to this I was going to call it Machina. Murray will give it the proper pronunciation when he takes over. But we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So we respectfully acknowledge that the UBC Vancouver campus is situated within the traditional territory of the Musqueam people. We also know that you are joining us from many places near and far, and we acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. To this, I want to add my personal and profound sorrow over the recent discovery of the remains of 215 children buried on the grounds of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. I know this sorrow is shared by many in our community. I am challenging myself to no longer be complicit with Canada's colonial past through my lack of action. I am challenging myself to become more educated and to identify actions that I can take to positively contribute to reconciliation. And I will hand it over to Dongwook now.
Thank you, Joanna. I'd like to do a quick intro about these events, the movie and the host and the guest, and then we can start the Q&A and discussion sections. First off, this event is hosted by the Language Science Institute at UBC. Alex Walls here did a huge heavy weightlifting for organizing this event with the help from Elephant Resonance Tech and Jocelyn McKay. So thank you so much for making this possible. We are here after we watch Ex Machina. I believe we have done that, the homework. Let me give a quick intro about the movie without going further into the scenario, because you have watched the movie. It's directed by Alex Garland and screenplayed in 2015. It won Academy Awards, one award for Best Writing. Oh no, actually Best Achievement in Visual Effect, but it was nominated for Best Writing, Original Screenplay. The movie provides rich talking point regarding the AI especially, and has been the center of discussion in this pop culture community when it comes to AI. And it provides interesting discourses around the challenges of operationalizing the distinction between conscious or unconscious beings, or the importance of embodiment and interaction in characterizing cognition. Also, I have noticed that it refers to several interesting existing discourses in AI, such as Turing Test, some implicit references to the Chinese room argument or the simulation hypothesis. It's a very interesting movie for this kind of intellectual discussion. Today, we will proceed with introducing the host and the guest, and the host, co-host will bring up a couple of questions as a startup, and then we're gonna turn the microphone to the audience. To introduce myself quickly, I'm Dongwook Yoon. I'm an assistant professor at UBC Computer Science doing HCI, Human Computer Interaction Research. I was invited here for writing a paper on the virtual voice assistant and studying what I mean by the natural, having natural human interaction with agents. And that study has been done with Joanna McGrenere here and my master students, Yelim Kim. Joanna, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. So first, for accessibility reasons, I'll describe myself. I have short brown hair, glasses, Caucasian, female, middle-aged, brown walls in the background with a picture, and a black shirt. So I am Dr. Joanna McGrenere. I'm a professor in computer science. I am part of Designing for People cluster, as well as language sciences. My work is in the area of human-computer interaction, specializing in personalized interaction, as well as universal usability and accessibility, as well as computer-supported cooperative work. I will briefly just make sure people are aware of the DFP and the language sciences, and then we'll turn it over to Dongwook to introduce our real guest. So the Designing for People research cluster aims to address complex human-facing design problems by accelerating creativity at the nexus of social and technical problem solving. It promotes interdisciplinary teamwork and methods, strives to understand the diverse abilities, needs, and values of users, creates high-value resources for DFP researchers, and finds new paths to societal impact by working closely with partners, users, domain experts, communities, and companies. Language sciences aims to connect scholars, teachers, and researchers working in all areas of the language sciences to create collaborations that produce and support innovative research. And it hosts, among other things, this regular film screening and Q&A. And at this point, I'll hand it back to Dongwook, who is going to introduce our lead Q&A responder.
I have honor to introduce Dr. Marie Shanahan. Dr. Shanahan is a professor of cognitive robotics at Imperial College London, and also is a senior research scientist at DeepMind. Professor Shanahan's book, Embodiment and the Inner Life, which is actually available online, and today I found, and I put it on my vacation reading list. And the book served as inspiration for the director of the movie, Alex Garland's, while he was writing the screenplay for Ex Machina. Dr. Shanahan was one of the scientific advisors on Ex Machina with the capacity, I believe. Dr. Shanahan earned his PhD at University of Cambridge, and he has been publishing he has many publications on artificial intelligence with a focus on the principles behind the sophisticated cognition in both nature and artificial beings, also the relationship between the cognition and embodiment. So I think we are ready to move on to the next exciting phase of the Q&A. And as the kind of the start up, we co-host can start asking questions to Dr. Shanahan. I will hand my mic to Joanna so she can bring up the first point.
So the first question features the Turing Test. So we know that this features very centrally in the movie, it features centrally in computer science. And we're wondering if you can speak to how the Turing Test was used in this movie. And because we have such a diverse audience with diverse backgrounds, if you could begin by giving a little bit more background on the Turing Test than what is given in the movie, and then talk about how it is implemented in the movie, which is different than the classic implementation.
Yeah, okay. So the Turing test was introduced by Alan Turing, the mathematician and computer scientist and cryptographer, in a paper called Computing Machinery and Intelligence in 1950. Of course, he didn't call it the Turing test. We've called it the Turing test since then. And the idea of Turing asked the question, you know, how can we judge that something is intelligent? And he posed the following test, that just imagine that you're interacting with two things. One of them is a computer and one of them is a human, but you don't know which is which. And you're interacting with them both just via a teletype. It would have been in those days, so we can imagine that it's a screen and well, not a screen actually, a screen just displaying text and a keyboard. So you're just interacting with them via what you can type and what they're typing back to you. And what he basically said is, if you can't tell the difference between the human and the computer after posing lots of questions, trying to engage in a normal kind of conversation with them, then effectively the computer is intelligent, or we can call it intelligent. And of course, there are an awful lot of nuances to this kind of test, like how long have you got to chat to the to chat to these two respective things and so on. And what are the rules? And you don't want the human to try and fool you into thinking it's a computer by behaving in a silly way, for example. So there's all kinds of ways that you could sort of game the test. But basically, it was a sort of behavioral test for intelligence. And one of the key things about it is that, of course, it's a disembodied test. So you don't see the thing that you're interacting with. You don't see it interacting with the world in any kind of way apart from through the keyboard and the screen. So that's very different to what you see in Ex Machina. So in Ex Machina, so Caleb, of course, is interacting with Ava, and he can see Ava, and he can see Ava, manipulating things and in the world. And Ava is clearly embodied and moves around in the world, shares the same world as we do. So in fact, it's not really a Turing test at all. And not only can he see those things, but he can clearly see that she is a robot. So we know that she's a robot right from the start. And indeed, towards the beginning of the film, when this theme of the Turing test first comes up, Caleb says to Nathan, but it's not really the Turing test, is it? Because I can see that Ava is a robot. And then Nathan comes back with a really, really important line. He says something along the lines of, well, he says, we're kind of like way beyond that. What we're interested in is to show you that she's a robot and see if you still feel that she is conscious. And so that's actually completely different from the Turing test. In fact, I like to call it the Garland test, because I think it's actually in its own right a little kind of contribution to the philosophy of these things. And so that's really what it's all about, is through interacting with this being, what is Caleb's intuitive judgment? Does he feel that she is a conscious creature? Is that enough?
For that. Yes, that's fantastic. No, that's fantastic, and that's the strong essence. And Nathan kept saying, "But what do you feel? What do you feel?" And tried to get Caleb out of his, AI training background. So that's great. Thank you for that. If you could just repeat the Garland test, is what you said you would call it?
Well, yes, because Alex, because it's obviously Alex Garland really came up with this and when I first saw the script, long before it was filmed, and Alex, had given me the script to kind of go through and comment on, and next to that part in the script, I wrote "spot on," because I thought it was just, I thought that was he really got to the heart of what the real philosophical issue is there with consciousness. And in fact, so if I can wrap it on for 1 minute, 1 minute more. So for me, it really relates quite closely to the later Wittgenstein's ideas, which I'm very attached to, and were a big theme in my book, Embodiment and the Inner Life. And there's somewhere in Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations, he's thinking about this question of how do you know? He imagined somebody's saying, in one of these kind of student discussions, how do you know that this person isn't just an automaton? And he says, well, I don't have the opinion that they're thinking, feeling, being, but rather I just have that's just the attitude I take towards them. I mean, he's saying that it's a kind of a much deeper thing. It's about you can't help but treat them in that way when you've interacted with them and they behave in the sort of way that they do. So yeah, he's sort of saying it goes a bit deeper than just reasoning like that. So I think that Alex was channeling Wittgenstein a little bit there.
Thank you.
I have a second question, a little bit more specific to one character of the movie, but it's often regarded as a kind of secondary character, I believe, for many people, Kyoko. This event is being organized by Language Science, and many people here are interested in the nature of language and the way it's applied in our life. So that's why I found the character of Kyoko very interesting, and interesting as a cinematic device. Her character cannot speak a verbal language, but gesture and dance, kind of embodied language. But her social interaction was through only the abusive relationship with the creator, Nathan. And maybe perhaps that led her to become eventually conscious. Did she? I don't know. So understanding, and eventually it feels that Kyoko understood Ava's language and ended up helping Ava kill Nathan by bringing the knife, right? So my question is, given that, what do you think that the character of Kyoko tells about the relationship between our social interaction and consciousness?
Yeah, well, because the question of whether Ava is conscious, I think is, or not, is actually one of the really deep questions that the film raises. So if let's talk a little bit about Ava first, and then come back to Kyoko. So I think that so certainly Alex Garland's intention, I think, was that that Ava is conscious. So that's what he believes, as it were, as the author. That was, but he was always said that he's very much open to other interpretations. So and in fact, there is a scene that doesn't appear in the movie, but was in the original script, where Ava is going off in the helicopter right at the end, and she has this little conversation with the helicopter pilot who carries her off. And in the original script, there was a little scene where we see Ava from the inside, as it were. So we see all these sort of fluttering vectors, is how he describes it in the script, and we see the sounds as kind of blips, and a very kind of alien thing. And in the script it says that, this is how Ava, sort of what it's like for Ava on the inside, and how she sees us. It's completely and utterly alien. And that little bit, which they never actually included in the final film, makes you suddenly have sort of second thoughts at the end. Like, is she really conscious, or is she maybe conscious in a way that's completely different from the way we're conscious? And so for me, the film really ultimately leaves that question open, even in Ava's case. It's a really interesting question. So in the case of Kyoko, we have much less to go on even than Ava, because we see much less of her, and of course we don't hear her speak. So we, this sort of feeling that we have and that we rely on, that a fellow creature is conscious, is really helped along a great deal by language, and in fact we can anthropomorphize machines too much, and it can kind of mislead us, I think, quite easily into thinking there's consciousness there when there isn't. But it's a really big cue. So that's a big cue for us in Ava. In Kyoko, we have many sort of fewer cues, I would say. But certainly there's this moment where she's communicating with Ava, and they're sort of whispering to each other, and again it seems to be a sort of alien kind of communication. It's clearly not a human language, and yet there's this sort of exchange. And yet on the other hand, she then sacrifices herself, and in a way, and so you wonder whether she is a mere automaton there in following through some command that Ava gave her, whereas Ava maybe is the truly conscious being. Of course, there's no such thing as the truth here, right? Because it's just a piece of fiction. But I think these are the sort of the different thoughts that we're led down. As far as social interaction is concerned, so I guess so my view is that, and indeed language is, so certainly my view is that we can certainly have consciousness without language, because I think we see that in other animals, in non-human animals. Non-human animals are capable of suffering and of behaving in a very intelligent way, and of empathy. Often dogs clearly capable of empathy. So I think I'm quite confident in saying we can have consciousness without language. Consciousness without social interaction, well, so there it gets kind of complicated, because I think consciousness, actually there's lots of different aspects to it, and we use the word to actually denote a whole package of things. Like we speak of our awareness of the world, so that's a kind of consciousness. So I can imagine a non-social creature having an awareness of the world, and that's certainly a kind of consciousness, and being able to experience pain, as maybe Kyoko does. So that's certainly a kind of consciousness. So we can imagine all of these things, and to some extent, I think the film leaves it open for us to, interpret, interpret things as we wish, and to argue about it, from a critical point of view as to, what's the truth within the world of the film there.
Thank you. That's super clear. I think interesting takeaway is that there can be a range of types to define cognition, the consciousness, and the ability to speak might be chosen artificially because of the prejudice of human race, and also those who are able to speak. I think we have many people raise their hand. I saw hands raised by Marie first, then maybe Facundo Sosa Ray, and then Peter Rayner, if that's correct. Shall we address the audience questions in that order? Marie, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for putting this together, all the organizers. I have to say, after watching the film for the second or third time, the one lingering thought and question that I had was around my own sense of conflating consciousness with conscience. And in my mind, I see that a lot of the fear that individuals have around artificial intelligence, be it soft AI or hard AI, is around the rightness and wrongness of action, of that entity's action. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on those two things. Can we have one without the other?
Yeah, gosh. Well, I guess that my view is that one of the interesting, I mean, if we can if we just think of a science fiction world, and we imagine that AI, there was no such thing as real AI in the world, we didn't sort of have to worry about the implications of it, then one of the really interesting things about the very concept of AI, a science fiction concept, is I think it allows us to think about the space of possible minds, which is a phrase that the British philosopher Aaron Sloman introduced. I really like this phrase, the space of possible minds. And in his way of thinking, the space of possible minds, it obviously encompasses humans and other animals and extraterrestrials we've never encountered, and possibly artificial intelligence as well. I think if we widen the space of possible minds, in that way that we think about, then we certainly can allow for, I think, consciousness without conscience. I mean, I assume by conscience you mean a kind of moral conscience, right? And so I think we can certainly imagine creatures, that are different from us, even biological creatures on other planets, as well as artificial, intelligences that have a kind of consciousness but have absolutely no moral conscience whatsoever. This is perhaps it's a scary prospect, and maybe we don't want to make a thing like that. But I think we can certainly do that. I also think, by the way, that we can also disentangle consciousness from intelligence, because we can clearly have we have creatures who are less intelligent than us. They're still pretty smart, like the monkey in your picture there, but are clearly conscious and are capable of suffering, but are maybe not quite as smart as us. And perhaps fish who are less smart can still experience pain, perhaps. So you can have consciousness with much less intelligence, and you can also have intelligence without consciousness. So perhaps Alexa or Siri being mentioned, and so there's a kind of intelligence there. So I think we can dissociate all of these things in the space of possible minds.
Marie, I think there is a relevant question I think it's a follow-up. So I'm bringing this up before moving on to the other people. Anthony Hartzman asked, Dr. Shanahan could define your view of the term consciousness.
You want me to define consciousness? Well, of course, this is the you know, the kind of nightmare question that you're hoping will never come up in these circumstances, but always does. So, well, it's very hard to define, indeed. But when this question does come up, I do tend to like to break the concept down, actually. So I think there are different aspects of consciousness. So I mentioned already that I think we can talk about awareness of the world as one aspect of consciousness. So we and our fellow creatures, you know, non-human creatures, are sense the world and have an awareness of the things in front of us and of other creatures, in fact. So that's one aspect of consciousness. I think that we can talk about the capacity for suffering, and I think that's another aspect of consciousness, another facet of consciousness. A sort of slightly more obscure facet of consciousness is the capability for cognitive integration, which I think is very important. So we can, in humans, we can distinguish between you know, a behavior which is actually unconscious or habitual versus behavior which is conscious and that we can, you know, remember afterwards and talk about and so on. And I think this distinction between you know, habitual and unconscious behavior and conscious behavior is very important, and that distinction seems to be very much tied up with a kind of cognitive integration, the ability of our brains to bring together a lot of its resources and focus them on the situation at hand, which we do in the conscious state, and we are less capable of doing when we're doing things habitually and sort of and unconsciously. So maybe a capacity for empathy is another aspect of consciousness. So I think you can sort of divide it up into different things, and these things all kind of come as a package in humans. That so you can you know, some of them are maybe not there with other animals, and others we can imagine not being there in you know, in the artificial intelligences of the future that we may one day make, or maybe not. So I don't know if that's a very good answer, but it's of course it's a very difficult question.
Thank you, Marie. The next question can be from Facundo Sosa Rey.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, well, thank you very much for organizing this. My question kind of touches on something you mentioned on the previous answer. You say that we can possibly decouple intelligence from consciousness. I can kind of imagine that for simple things like Siri, Alexa, but if we wanted to imagine like a human level, a general intelligence, it has to be able to model and represent the mental states of conscious beings. So it seems like it would have to have some kind of internal state itself to be able to do that. So I kind of have the intuition that for truly general intelligence, consciousness kind of comes along with the rest of it. Like maybe not something similar, though we would recognize as consciousness, but something that serves the same purpose.
Yeah. So so I do think so. I think I you know, I agree with you that if something, you know, was qualified as a general intelligence, as an artificial general intelligence, then I think I agree with you that it would have to be able to, you know, model, in some sense, model the mental states of other beings. But the ability to, but I noticed that when you said it, you said model the conscious states of other beings, and I think that the conscious mental states. But I think actually I'm not sure that that's really necessary to be able to have to model, you know, to be able to model the consciousness, or to be able to understand the consciousness from the inside, in order to be able to, you know, behave in a way as if it understood. So you know, I think it's possible we can imagine, you know, I mean, who knows what we'll actually build, and that's another question altogether. But I think we can imagine building an AGI, an artificial general intelligence. We can imagine building one that's actually really good at modeling, you know, other beings, modeling humans, and modeling their internal states, in fact. And responding to them and so on, but it actually has no conscious internal states of its own. I mean, of course, there's a sense in which you would never understand the conscious states of other creatures in the way that we understand each other's, in the way that we ourselves are conscious. So there's a kind of you know, understanding that's not possible there, a true empathy. But nevertheless, I think there will be another kind of understanding which, you know, which is possible, which would enable something to behave very intelligently in interaction. You know, and this is not possible in humans, but again, when we think about the space of possible minds, I think we can envisage such a thing.
Thank you. Next is Peter Rayner.
First, I want to just compliment you, Marie, and Alex, I guess. When I watch these kinds of films, I'm often having to challenge myself to not point out the flaws and, oh, they made a mistake here, they messed up something there, and this is really the only film of its kind that I've seen that I couldn't come up with any flaws, that I thought, wow, they got everything right. And I didn't know that it was you who was the advisor, but my comment at the time to my wife was, whoever gave Alex serious advice on all of the cognitive features and the AI features, et cetera, really did a bang up job. So I really wanted to pass that on. And I was quite interested in your list of some of the components of consciousness, but I wanted to probe a slightly different one with you, which is the role of intentionality. And you actually mentioned it in your discussion of Ava and Kyoko, that did Kyoko actually have the internal drive, the intention to do what she did, or was she just a tool of Ava's? And if she was a tool of Ava's, it seemed to me you were inferring that then she wouldn't qualify fully as being a conscious being. But if she had that internal drive, then she would. Do you think that that's a reasonable stance to take?
Yeah, I guess that was kind of what I was suggesting. I think that it would at least throw into it makes it more questionable, I think, if she's merely an automaton of Ava's. But of course, you know, humans coerce other humans, and you know, and are still very much conscious in their own right. So I think you know, it really throws that into question, I think, and especially in the context of you know, of knowing that she doesn't speak, or maybe she does, of course, because there is this exchange with Ava. So it's you know, it's a very you know, it's a open, another one of these open questions, which is, by the way, what I really like about the film personally is the fact that many of these questions are left open and are left, you know, you're left arguing about them in the pub afterwards, and that's, you know, that's one of the great achievements of the film, I think. By the way, I just have to come back to your very kind compliment and deflect it, I have to say, because really the credit is really due to Alex Garland, and although he read my book. And you know, and very generously acknowledges my book as being you know, the main influence on the film, and so you know, I guess you know, I hope that that had some positive effect on it. But when I saw the script, it was really pretty much you know, the script that was filmed, and there was very little that I had to say that I felt was, you know, wasn't right in it. So you know, huge credit to Alex. I mean, he really is a brilliant guy, and I thought it was a wonderful script when I first read it. I mean, it's a nice experience that I've had in a way, which is that I read the script when the film didn't exist, so I was reading it just as a book, and I had none of the images that we all have that have now entered popular culture, and it was it was a bit of a page turn, I have to say. I was, I really kind of wanted to know what was going to happen next and what issues he was going to bring up next, and so yeah, it really was a brilliant script. So the credit, all the credit goes to Alex, I think.
Well, thank you.
Next is Atesh Avchi.
Hello. First, I just want to say thank you to the organizers to make this event a public one. Thank you, and to Dr. Murray to come here to be with us. My question is more about one of the implications of creating consciousness that was discussed in the movie. We see that Nathan, he wants to do experiments with these conscious beings, but supposedly conscious. And because they're conscious, they want to escape. They want to be free for themselves. And this has been discussed in many movies, Philip K. Dick's novels being passed in the society. And I just read the novel of Annalee Newitt's Autonomous, which is a very recent one. And they're autonomous robots, and the line between being a human and a robot is so blurry that the laws enforcing humans and non-humans are similar. So they say that if a robot can be owned, a human can also be owned, because in a way the line between them is very blurry. I'm very curious about your view of, if one day consciousness is created, what would be the ethic way to treat them in a way? Because just making experiments on them when they're conscious it doesn't sound ethical. So yes, that was my question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does not sound ethical at all. And of course, I mean, it's this is a very speculative question, because we don't know how to make things, the artifacts that are conscious at the moment, and maybe that will never happen. But if we get to the point, I think, where we think that is about to happen, or we are able to do that, then I think, because of these ethical issues, I think we should probably think quite hard about whether to go ahead or not. I think it's a really difficult question, and the philosopher Thomas Metzinger, for example, argues that that we really shouldn't ever do that, because we shouldn't ever look into the possibility of artificial consciousness, because we wouldn't even know how to treat these things well, because at least with animals, so we care very much about animal welfare, and we have certain ethical standards in how we treat animals, let alone other humans. But at least with other animals, we share biology with them, and we have some basic understanding of their needs. And Thomas Metzinger argues that with these things that we might make, we'd have such little point of contact with them that we wouldn't even know how to treat them well. So I think it's if the big if we ever do get to that point, I think we would have to think very, very carefully about it. And of course, if we did actually go ahead and do that, then we would be in exactly the same position as we are with any suffering, anything capable of suffering, which we would have to treat them right.
Thank you. We have a long queue, so let's see until when we can go. I think there was some excitement about Mark Nelson's question, so I'd like to prioritize that question. And then next is Andy Worth and Lou Boudon, if we can go to that, the questioner. So Mark's question is, the line that really struck me was Nathan saying something like, quote, search engine history doesn't show what people are thinking, doesn't just show what people are thinking, it shows how they are thinking, end quote. This is explained to be the basis for Ava's mind. Could you go into some of your thoughts on this line and the real world implications we see, such as in recommendation algorithms?
Yeah, so so the film is interesting because in this respect, because Ava is clearly an embodied intelligence, and I would say that, you know, in the case of human and biological intelligence, our embodiment is absolutely central to what it means to be intelligence. I mean, intelligent. So our brains are really there to help us move these bodies around in the world and interact with the things that are in the world and the other creatures that are in it, and you know, and everything else follows from that. You know, everything, you know, language, mathematics, art, literature, it all follows from that. So we, you know, Ava is embodied, and so she kind of ticks that box, as it were, so we can imagine that that a good deal of her intelligence may, in some way, you know, we don't really see Ava's backstory, right? I mean, this is the thing. So, you know, we always have to remind ourselves it's a piece of science fiction. So we have to. So whatever we fill in there is speculative. And even if Alex tells us that, you know, a backstory he had in mind, it's, you know, we can make up our own backstory. But the backstory, you know, we don't really hear. But I think we should assume that embodied interaction with the world is a big part of it. So then at the same time, there's, as your questioner just pointed out, there are these few lines in the movie that allude to all the data that's been collected from you know, from the internet, and so that's no doubt includes lots of language and many images and so on. So that's all kind of is collected from the internet. And well, you know, if we were to build build AI, you know, if we were trying to build general intelligence using that basis alone, then I think that what we would build would be a pretty alien kind of intelligence. It would not be very human-like. And personally, I feel that it's probably would never really quite get to human level intelligence. I mean, this is my point of view on this, is that embodied interaction with the physical world is what helps to endow us with the very foundations of common sense. And the foundations of, you know, foundational common sense is one of the things that's absent in today's AI, and is really one of the kind of big open problems. And by that I mean just you know, our understanding of very ordinary everyday things, like what is an object, and what does it mean for something to be an obstruction, or for it to move along a path, or for it to be a container, or for it to be supported on something. So, I mean, there's a whole load of these really basic physical concepts, and a whole load of equally basic social concepts. I mean, what does it mean to be with somebody, to help somebody, and so I think all of that foundational common sense, I think, really is only going to come through interaction with the world and with other creatures inhabiting that world. So so in the film we kind of get this suggestion of this sort of two-pronged approach. You know, there is the embodiment. Clearly Ava is embodied, but also she's somehow, we're supposed to believe that a lot of what she's got has been acquired through the, you know, huge amount of data on the internet. So that's a very you know, it's an interesting mix. So I think the other, there was another part of the question, I think, relating to the perhaps you could repeat the second part of the question related to the ethical implications of this kind of thing. Could you is the question there? I can't see the chat. Well, actually I can see the chat, but I haven't opened it because I feel it's going to distract me if I start reading the chat. So maybe you could find the question.
Yeah, I can step in here. So the second part. So it goes on after the quote says, "This is explained to be the basis of Ava's mind. Could you go into some of your thoughts on this line and the real world implications we see, such as in recommendation algorithms?"
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, it's a really interesting question, because I think I certainly think we can create you know, a very powerful artificial intelligence of a certain sort. just through processing all kinds of data that's available on the internet. And I mean, so it's a language faculty. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the large language models that are out there in the world today, like GPT-3, which are extremely powerful and persuasive when you interact with them, and they're only going to get better and better. But my view is that there's a kind of limit that we're going to hit with that approach to artificial intelligence, and that you really have to bring interaction with the world, into the picture to get real, general intelligence.
Thank you for that. I think we have Andy Worth up next with his question.
Hi, I wanted to ask if you think Ava would succeed in the real world. In the after credits scene, I think we see her in the real world, but we don't see her interact with people and successfully blend in as a human, really. She's sort of just moving around. So I wonder if she would be able to succeed in interacting with this generalized world, and not just two nerdy dudes at a really expensive house in the middle of nowhere. So these are very different situations, and I'm wondering if her training phase, I guess, on all that data was possibly overfitting her to a very specified environment. Yeah.
So again, with the reminder that this is obviously speculating about a fictional world. So it's not like there's some kind of ground truth out there in the answers to this question. But again, kind of speculating, given what we know about the kinds of AI we can build today and the kind of AI that's envisaged in the film for the future. Well, I would imagine she'd do pretty well, because I think that we're two things. So first of all, clearly she has figured out how to trick both Caleb and Nathan in order to escape, and that's one of the main themes of the film, of course, is that Ava. So by the way, Alex as always says that it's Ava's film. She is the main character in the film, and so she triumphs in the end by escaping from her captor. And she does that through her guile in understanding human psychology in a way. So she really plays Caleb, really. And so I imagine that her understanding of human psychology, admittedly, okay, so it's just a couple of how do you describe them, like nerd bros in a fancy house, but nevertheless, I think we can extrapolate that to her understanding of human psychology, in general, and also we get hints that she's clearly very interested in the idea of, like, she stands at that intersection, at the end that she mentions earlier on. She wants to stand at a very busy intersection to see lots of humans. That's what, so I think it's clear from that we're meant to believe that she's been exposed to a lot of human psychology and a lot of human activity in a vicarious way through the internet and through videos and so on. But that would have, notwithstanding what I said earlier on about the limits of that, and without proper embodied interaction, I think that would give her a pretty good basis, and that she'd be, I think she'd do just fine, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have Luc Baudouin.
Oui, bonjour, everyone. And hi, Murray.
Hi.
I'll introduce myself as a former student of Aaron Sloman, who was mentioned a couple of times today. My PhD thesis was goal processing and autonomous agents. And I wrote a review of your book, Murray, as you may recall.
I do.
And so if others don't know, so it was in, let me see, I wrote it down, International Journal of Machine Consciousness. It was a longish review. Your book had a major impact on me. One of the key ideas for people who don't know is, if I understand you correctly, is that consciousness involves the vying of control of these different processes in the brain for the major connective tissue or pathways in the brain, the major pathways in the connectome. I've been thinking of that ever since. It's a really interesting idea, and it connects with some work in on emotions, which I'll just mention. Louis Pessoa, throw it out there. So I'm going to give you a menu of 3 things, and then that would give other people things to think about, perhaps. One is like, if to give you the opportunity to talk about your theory. I don't see that aspect could easily play out in the film. And I guess you alluded to that, but I think it's very interesting nonetheless. The other question would be, how has your theory of consciousness evolved since your 2010 book? And another thing that I'll just throw out there is we seem the film kind of goes towards an effective Turing test. You called it a Garland test, which I think is better. It's basically, there's an effective component to that. And I guess in order to answer questions about, those kinds of questions, we need theoretical framework. So you really can't answer these questions unless you have a theory of emotion, say, because it veers towards emotions, right? So there's different theories to choose from. According to one theory, I got the sense that Ava failed the test because, like Sloman's theory of emotion, is that it involves a loss of control of executive functions. But if, I think the reading we're supposed to get of the film, it's actually that Ava's actually in control. She's planned this out. She's planned her escape, and she's okay to leave Nathan just die. Anyway, so in a sense, she's lost it, but that's okay. It's not whether she's passed the test or not, but I was wondering if you had discussions about theories of emotion as a scientific advisor, and what theories did you gravitate towards in informing the director?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that sort of idea of affect and so on. So I think actually, so when Nathan comes up with that line and says, the question is, do you feel that she's still conscious? So I didn't really interpret that in terms of affect so much. It's not about there being an emotional response to her. Although actually, now you mention it, that clearly is part of what Alex Garland has in mind, because Caleb does develop an emotional response to her. But I took that as being more a matter of, does your intuition tell you that she's conscious, right? Does your intuition tell you that she's conscious in the way that maybe if you interact with an animal, that maybe an animal that you're not familiar with, like say a horse or something. Suppose you've never really interacted much with horses, and then you encounter a horse, and you make friends with this horse, and it's clearly responding to you, and you're responding to it, and then your profound intuition is that this is a fellow creature who's sharing the world with you, and is perceiving you as a fellow creature as you're perceiving it as a fellow creature. It's a really deep feeling. I mean, presumably we've all had this kind of feeling with animals, and I think that so for me, that's what that line is saying. Is do you get that profound, intuitive sensation of fellowship, with Ava, right, as a fellow conscious creature? And now clearly there is this kind of like romantic, subplot going on as well. So clearly, Ava is playing into that. So that's a whole other dimension there. So that's all kind of interesting. So just very quickly about. So the things that I discussed with Alex. So as I mentioned earlier on, when I first saw the script, it was already pretty thoroughly in pretty final state, and I had a few comments on the bits and pieces here and there, most of which Alex just completely ignored. And we did meet up quite a few times while before the filming and during the filming, and mainly Alex just wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about this stuff. He wanted to talk about AI. He wanted to talk about consciousness. I don't think at that point it really fed into the film terribly much, but he was, and still is, really, really interested in these sorts of questions. So I think that whatever influence I had on the film was really mainly, apart from the Easter egg, if people know about these, apart from the Easter egg, then mainly the main influence I had on the film was before I even met Alex. It was through my book, really, to be honest. So. Yeah. Then, as for my own theories on consciousness, well, I did get really, maybe you've seen this essay, Luke, but I did get very interested in in this whole concept of the space of possible minds, Aaron's concept of the space of possible minds, and pursued that a little bit further. For example, there's an essay in Eon magazine which people can look up, where I'm talking about consciousness in the space of possible minds, and so the essay is called Conscious Exotica, and I'm really interested in, you know, how exotic could an intelligence be, or another creature, or another being be, and we could still understand it, you know, as conscious at all. And so that's, you know, I think it's a really profound and interesting question. It's very much inspired by Aaron Sloman's, in fact, and the phrase "the space of possible minds" comes up in the first paragraph of the paper. So.
Thank you for that, Marie. We are about 3 minutes from ending. Unfortunately, we won't get to everybody's questions. I would like Mariana to have the opportunity to ask the last question here. And I will just put a little end to whatever question is she's going to ask Marie, if you could comment on how close of a reality we are to, you know, Ava being in our existence in this world. It's science fiction, but how close are we? So Mariana, please ask your question.
Sorry, I think there's someone else before me. Devasmita. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Devasmita, I think you actually were ahead in the queue. So thank you, Mariana, for that. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mariana. That was very kind of you. And thank you, everybody, for this talk, actually. I'm a PhD student, and I'm working on human-robot communication. And every time I come up against this notion that humans are supposed to be behaving logically in a given situation, but actually humans don't. There's a lot of irrational, illogical ways that humans behave. And how does that, how does all that come into designing something that's supposedly conscious? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well. Okay. So slightly derailed by you throwing in the word conscious at the very end of that question, because I thought you were going to say designing something intelligent. Because you know, going back to an earlier question, I'm not sure that we really, you know, are trying to design something conscious for all the kind of ethical reasons that were mentioned there. But when it comes to designing something intelligent, I guess, I mean, you know, you're a PhD student working in this area, so I'm sure you're very familiar with this stuff. But as you probably know, these large language models like GPT-3, for better or for worse, you know, will pick up on the most, you know, illogical patterns, including very unpleasant ones, you know, in human speech and thought, if that's the data that they're fed. So so you know, it's a sort of a bit of a misnomer that computers have to be logical and rational and all that kind of thing, because of course machine learning is perfectly capable of learning, you know, completely illogical patterns of thinking and of language and of reproducing them. So that, you know, that can be for better or for worse, because we don't necessarily want to be always strictly logical, I guess. But machine learning is going to, you know, is going to just mimic us, for better or for worse. I would say. I mean, what's your view on that? Actually, I mean, as you're working in that area.
Actually, so I'm in more of an industrial viewpoint, and I'm trying to understand how humans and robots can possibly communicate within a space where they have to be logical. But
right.
I feel in order for these systems to be as human-like as possible, we need to encode irrationality as well. Something that's not being, I feel I've not come across research that is doing that. I am even thinking whether it's, do people want that? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. Well, I guess that if we're thinking about robotics, you know, in a properly industrial context, then we probably do want to have robots doing things that we can, that we can verify, mathematically as far as possible. So, if you've got a robot that is, assembling components in a factory, say, or picking things up in a warehouse, then the more maths and logic we can apply to verifying that it meets its specification, the better. But part of that, will be also kind of making the environment so that it's very constrained and manageable, and that's very different, of course, from the open-ended kinds of environments that humans operate in. So I guess that in an industrial kind of context, maybe you want to engineer the environment carefully and engineer your robot carefully so that you can specify its behavior and verify it as much as possible. And the more open-endedness you let into the process, the harder it's going to get, and the more human-like maybe the interaction with it will need to be. But at the same time, the more room there is for unexpected behavior and unwanted illogical behavior, I guess.
I completely agree with you, and that's where I feel we draw a line between generalized intelligence and, again, we talk about adaptive systems and generalized intelligence, but I guess in practice we'll still have to draw a line and really constrain that intelligence. Thank you for your answer.
So at this moment, since we are just a few minutes past, I would like to draw this to a close to be respectful of everybody's time, in particular, Marie's time, who's joining us in another time zone where it's much later into the day. So on behalf of Designing for People and Language Sciences, Marie, we would like to thank you for joining us and providing such rich, expert opinions about this, and just it's just fascinating from people who are quite a distance from this area to hear about your experiences on this, and even things just like reading the script is wonderfully insightful. Of course, I would like to thank all of those of you who have joined us here today to make this a rich discussion, for your wonderful questions. We regret that we couldn't get to them all. They were so rich. We were told in advance, oh, prepare a handful of questions in case there aren't many. We don't think that will be the case here, but you never know. And of course, that was not the case here. So rich. I know the organizers had their own questions. So I do want to thank our language sciences folks, our DFP folks, for their help in just administering that. And at that point, of course, and my co-host Dongwook, Yoon, I want to thank. So I will draw this to a close now and wish everybody a wonderful day. I think I might have to watch the movie again too and catch some of the little bits that I might have missed. It was my first time viewing it. Sci-fi is not my genre, so very interesting. All right.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.